Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transform their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. Today's episode is an absolute treat for anyone interested in workplace well-being, leadership, and the power of creating meaningful change. Chase Sterling is someone who's not just talking about the importance of well-being in the workplace, she's actively transforming the conversation and building spaces where it can thrive. Through her nonprofit, her consulting work, and her years of experience across multiple industries, she's inspiring others to prioritize what truly matters in both our personal and professional lives. This episode is really all about taking ownership of your journey, embracing challenges, and crafting a career aligned with purpose and impact. Whether you're contemplating your next big move or simply seeking inspiration to level up, this conversation will leave you fired up to take action. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Chase Sterling, founder and CEO of the Wellbeing Think Tank and principal consultant at HHP Cultures. Chase is a well-being expert with over 20 years of experience driving impactful change through evidence-based strategies. She's a dynamic speaker who blends storytelling, science, and humor to engage audiences across the globe. Now, Chase's journey is really remarkable. From her beginnings as a U.S. Army vet to leadership roles at well-known organizations, she has consistently championed the power of resilience and well-being in every environment she's touched. Now, today, through the Wellbeing Think Tank, Chase is dedicated to providing free educational events that support individual and organizational health, while her consulting work helps businesses implement sustainable, interdisciplinary well-being initiatives. I'm really, really excited to have her share her story and insights with you today. So Chase, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. I know what I've done, but when I hear it, it really kind of warms my heart. I'm like, oh yeah, it's kind of cool. Like I'm doing some good work out there. So yeah, it feels really good.
Exactly. That's you. That is you. And I love that. I think when I started, learning more about you, and huge, shout to Sandra Hunter for connecting us, I really wanted to dive into this conversation because some of the work that you're doing out there is just really impactful. And so I think, to really kind of tee us up for our guests, would love to get some background and, just learn a little bit more about you and so they can get a sense as to who you are as well. So you had this really diverse career. As I mentioned, you went from the U.S. Army, leading roles at companies like Google and Cigna. Now, can you share a bit about your early influences and how they shaped your approach to well-being and workplace culture?
Absolutely. Well, my personal life is really kind of the entryway to that. I grew up a little bit different than most people. I grew up in and out of children's services. Children's services came to my house. The police were at my house. I went to a group home for a while, and I barely got out by the skin of my teeth. I love telling people how I barely graduated high school. And I got my first paycheck job at 13. So outside of babysitting and helping around the neighborhood, that's when I got my first paycheck job, and working was the way out for me. That was my pathway to a better life. So work, my personal experiences with work, that shapes a lot of my views of work can really help people. Work can really help transform lives. And we participate in our communities. It helps us with community well-being and social well-being, obviously financial well-being, hopefully. And then when I got into more structured work environments, corporate work environments, I was really struck by how much influence the workplace has over our health and well-being. There's a wonderful book I reference all the time. It's called Dying for a Paycheck. It's by Jeffrey Pfeiffer, who is a professor. And there are hundreds of thousands of excess deaths a year by stress. And so I always say, as individuals, we have a personal responsibility to look after our own health and well being. But the role of a workplace is to, at a bare minimum, leave us in homeostasis. But work tends to bring a lot of us down if we're in an unhealthy workplace. But imagine a world where work uplifted us. Imagine a world where every day where you left work, you felt seen, valued, fulfilled, accomplished. That carries over into your personal life, and then that carries over into society. So I think my personal experiences with work being a pathway to a better life, and then having a mix of workplaces with great experiences, some not so great experiences, really shaped a lot of the work I do today.
No, without a doubt. And mixed with that personal background and then also your background of like exercise science, IO psych, you have a really unique perspective as you come into this space. How have some of these professional disciplines influenced your career trajectory and some of the work you do right now?
Absolutely. When I started college, I was a little bit older. I was 24 before I started higher education. So I had spent some time in the military. And I first studied exercise science, which, while it's really mainly in that physical realm, it gave me a really well rounded education on individual health and well being. So I kind of know enough to be dangerous in the nutrition land and financial well being and social well being and all these things. And individual well being is a piece, but I was really fascinated by organizational well being and what is within a workplace's control. So when I decided to pursue higher education and graduate school, I got my master's in IO psychology and with a concentration on occupational health, which really expanded my understanding of human behavior in workplace systems. And I think combining these fields, it really allows me to work with organizations and educate others on how to approach health and well-being at work in this holistic manner. So all you need to do is everything is something I say. So individuals, we still want to provide them with support, with resources, with benefits. But there are a lot of things within the organization's control that we can do. And so I think this blend really helps me design effective well-being strategies for organizations that are evidence-based, but also kind of adaptable and can meet the needs of their population.
No, I love that. And a part of this show, what we really talk about as the name, the notes, why people leave these big career decisions. I notice you've held, leadership and consulting roles across industries. What would you say has been your most impactful career transition? And why did you leave that role?
There's kind of two things I feel like I want to share. One, why I left was sometimes career decisions are pushed upon us. It's not within our control. And actually, the week I turned 30, I had a botched foot surgery, which turned into 5 foot surgeries, which turned into some chronic injuries, disability, chronic pain. And that is where my career took a pivot as far as really just working on individual health and well being. I was working in community health to really pivoting to workplace well being. So I wanted to share that because you can have all these goals for your career. And sometimes it's not about the work or the workplace or anything else. Sometimes a life event happens and it forces you to pivot. So I had to pivot because I can't stand on my feet 8 hours a day. I can't really stand for an hour anymore because I have a physical disability. The other kind of leaving that I think was most impactful was at some point I got to a place in my career where I realized my values really weren't aligning with some of the workplaces I was in. And it also wasn't fulfilling my passion for how I like to approach this work. So, again, when it comes to well being, all you need to do is everything. And I like to explore all those different areas. So, I decided to start my own consulting practice in 2019. And then, given the challenging times during the pandemic, especially the start of the pandemic in 2020, I opted to, venture a little bit into the corporate world again. And I found myself in the same position. And I was working so much. I didn't realize how stressed I was. I didn't know I was stressed. I knew I had some stress, but I didn't realize what my body was doing. And I had a silent heart attack and a transient ischemic attack, which is like a 1 second stroke. It's a baby stroke. So I was sacrificing my own health and well being for work, and that is not okay. So that I really realized I need to be in more control of the work I do. And so I just went back to having my own practice again, because then I was able to have the systems in place and the environment that supports my own health and well being. You can do a lot for yourself, but if you set boundaries and your workplace isn't valuing or allowing those boundaries to occur, then that's where we get tension. That's where burnout occurs. Research shows that's actually the leading cause of burnout in the workplace, is when an individual says, okay, here are the boundaries I need to be successful, but the workplace continues to violate them. So whether it's workload, whether it's scheduling over a meeting, whether it's double, triple booking you, whether it's not making sure there's backup for you. So I kind of wanted to massage those two things into one, but that's why I left.
No, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think one of the things you mentioned was that I didn't know I was stressed until, right? As you look back on that now, are there signs that you should have picked up that you were stressed that you didn't acknowledge initially?
Absolutely. And I did have kind of something that was thrown into this mix. So in late 2020, I ended up presenting in the ER. I had a sore shoulder. I found out I had a very rare condition and I had to have immediate life-saving surgery. And it was a 10-hour procedure. It was really intense. I was in the hospital 10 days. I went back to work too soon. So I think a lot of us who are high performers, high responsibility, take a lot of pride in our work, we want to get back at it. And also the way our systems are set up, well, short-term disability is only 6 weeks long. So I went back to work 6 weeks later, and I really should not have been back at work yet. My lung had collapsed during my surgery, and I couldn't even speak in full sentences without gasping for air, but I was back at work. And so I was pushing through that. And I knew I had been monitoring. A lot of us wear, a smartwatch. And I had noticed my resting heart rate had gone up really high. My average heart rate had gone up. And I was in communication with my doctor, but I thought it was just all because of the surgery and I was still healing. So I did have that as a factor. But when that's going on and you're not saying, hey, okay, well, I'm not at my best right now, I should pull back a little. If you just keep pushing, at some point your body's going to give up. Your body, you can only push so far, and then your body's going to say, okay, I give up. Here you go. We're going to have this major event. And luckily I survived and I'm fine. But yeah, and even me, I really like to share that story because I do this for a living. I'm trained in this and I know what to look for. But I was like, oh, I'm fine. I mean, I'm still sleeping good. I'm fine. I'm eating well. Yeah, I could be doing this. But I really didn't realize how stressed out I was because I think I was so used to being stressed that that was my normal. And I think that's the norm for a lot of us. We're so used to being stressed and doing so much that we don't realize we shouldn't be doing all that in the first place.
Great point. That is an absolutely great point. So thinking about some of the organizations you've worked with, you partner with Wounded Warrior Project and even NASA, and obviously you started your own venture. What lessons have you learned about leading well-being initiatives in truthfully vastly different environments?
Absolutely. I've been lucky to work at many amazing organizations and work with a lot of organizations. And what I like to say is evidence-based but experimental. So I think whenever we're doing some kind of initiative, strategic planning in the workplace, how are we making these decisions? We all have ideas and opinions on how things should be, but ideas and opinions are just that. They're not proven. So how can we take frameworks, science, evidence, research, whether it's business management or well-being or leadership, DEI, what can we take and then apply it in the workplace? But frameworks are frameworks and we have to be adaptable. So the way I work with plumbers, I have a plumbing company I worked with who they had such amazing results with their well-being is very different than how I approached it with a healthcare organization, is very different than how I approach it with an engineering firm. So I think we can know things to be true, but we need to be very adaptable about what the organization is, what the type of work is, who are the people working there, what are their needs. Because work environments are really different. So I think even though you can have expertise in something, none of us know everything. And you really have to be humble and do a lot of humble inquiry and really listen. So, really center employee listening, listening to leaders, and what is really going to benefit this organization at this time for their needs. The strategies I use look different with every single company. So we have to be flexible. But I think the foundation of well being at work is universal, where we all want to feel valued and supported and safe. So, yeah, that was all. I feel like that was kind of all over the place. But
No, but it definitely makes sense though. And I think you may feel like because of the organizations that you've implemented this or at least coached on this at are so vastly different. And they too are kind of all over the place as far as who they serve and their respective missions. So no, I think that was very, very clear though. One of the main themes that I've seen recurring in your career is this theme of resilience, right? Not only as a veteran, but clearly as some of the personal stories that you've just shared. This is a similar thing that comes up. Can you share a story, another story maybe where this trait has helped you navigate a major professional challenge or even pivot? Like you mentioned one earlier, but how have you been able to take some of these experiences and really influence some of the work that you lead in the spaces in which you show up?
when it comes to resilient, I always say I'm annoyingly resilient. And I think a lot of us are very resilient in our lives, but sometimes we take advantage of people who are resilient. Like, oh, Brian, you're strong. You can take this. Let me give you this too. Already been through that. You've been through this. So I think when we talk about resiliency, like, don't take advantage of those people who you know are resilient at work. But I think resilience has been a reoccurring theme in my career and in my life. I think in my mid 30s, I ended up having some more things happen, musculoskeletal, and my chronic pain got a lot worse. So I had been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, which they think was because of all the surgeries I had had. And I think I've had something like 12 surgeries. So I have actually really bad chronic pain. And a lot of people, unless they know me and talk to me, they have no idea what I'm carrying every day as far as that pain goes. I really believe in what I call non-toxic positivity. So something that has helped me to be resilient is a lot of things we know about mindfulness. I really got into my own mindful journey when I developed chronic pain, and I don't meditate. I am not good at sitting still or being quiet, but I do things like go for mindful walks, or I do mindful stretching, or I listen to music mindfully. And by that, that's the only thing I'm doing. And so developing chronic pain has had me really identify this non-toxic positivity, which is being optimistic, but being grounded in reality. And I think sometimes when we talk about health and well-being and happiness and positivity, we get into that toxic piece. And what I mean by that is everyone's always like, well, hurry up and get better. And I think it's really important to let people feel their emotions and process their emotions and work through them. So if someone's going through a challenging time in life, what they need is support during that time, and not, it's going to get better, put on a smiley face. We need to honor people with whatever they're going through. And we don't want to stay in that negative space. We don't want to stay in the woe is me, everything is awful, I'm spiraling downward. But you know what? It's okay to rot in bed for a little bit and, process those emotions and journal or go to therapy or work with a coach, whatever works for you. But I think being resilient has helped me just get through all of these changes in my life. My life kind of forced me to be resilient. So then in the workplace, I adapt really well. I think that's one of my skill sets. And it takes a lot to kind of get me off kilter. I always say, if no one's going to die or get fired, can it wait till tomorrow? Work is never done. And so really taking that step back and saying, is this truly urgent? Is it a need or is it a want? And then being able to be that kind of stability for other people. So to be calm in a high stress situation, I think people kind of lean on me for that because I'm not frazzled by a lot. But I will say, when everyone around me is stressed out and frazzled, that makes me frazzled. So again, I feel like my answer was very kind of all over the place and not very direct, but hopefully it was somewhat helpful.
No, without a doubt. And looking back on your journey, like you said, you've been in this space 20 plus years, all the decisions that you've made, is there one that really stands out as really kind of bringing into focus your career with your passion for workplace well-being?
Absolutely. I think I'm in a very privileged place that I was able to be an entrepreneur. And part of that is because I'm a veteran. I do have a disability rating. So my health care is taken care of by the VA. So that really allowed me the ability to start my own business because I didn't have to worry about my health insurance. But I think starting my own practice and really being able to help organizations in the way I saw best, while I worked for amazing organizations who do great work, a lot of times they did a very narrow scope of this is what they could provide to an organization. And I knew from my training, from my education, from my experiences, that piece is good, but we can do even more good if we add more on. So maybe they're only focused on the individual, or maybe they're only focused on the organization. And I was like, why not both? So I think being able to start my own practice, and that gave me clarity in what I do. And I said, I consult, I speak, and I educate. And I started doing webinars and offering free education for the community on workplace well-being. And that transformed into the nonprofit I have today, which is Wellbeing Think Tank. So I was able to get very clear on the things that fill my cup and leave me feeling fulfilled. And being able to make that decision to work the way that I thought was most impactful really helped align with my values. So I feel good about what I do every day. Every day when I put my head on the pillow, I can feel good about the work I'm doing.
No, that's awesome. And like a perfect segue into the well-being thing. Say, let's talk a little bit more about, the mission, the challenges, and some of the goals there. When I saw the concept around, the well-being thing take, I was like, wow, this is really powerful, right? And I've spoken with a lot of folks in this well-being, mental health space over the past couple seasons. What really inspired you to create it, and what need were you aiming to address in the workplace when this was initially formed?
Yeah, when we started, it started as me just doing education. And then with the impact of the pandemic, I felt like there were things I wanted to help educate people on that I was not an expert in. So I wanted to find a way to bring on experts. And what I saw when it comes to learning about well-being in the workplace is since the pandemic, since 2020, it's very trendy. So a lot of these things are very trendy. Mental health, burnout, psychological safety, a lot of these things, people didn't know what they were, but there's professionals like me who've been doing this stuff far before 2020. And I really wanted to elevate those practitioners. And people don't mean to cause harm. They really mean well when they're out there and trying to talk about these things. But our opinions on how we should deal with mental health in the workplace, our opinions on how leaders can be good, let's look at the science. Let's look at evidence-based, interventions and resources we have. And then also, I really wanted to highlight practitioners. I think a lot of times when you go into conferences and education spaces, they can be very commercialized. So the only people you're seeing speak are people who paid to speak. So it's a lot of commercial partners who, oh, I'm putting on this event, but it's all these people who paid to speak. And so they have a different interest in being there. I also think a lot of times at events, you see quote unquote thought leaders, which maybe have rich experiences, but sometimes when someone gets to that level, they stop doing the work. They're just kind of writing books and they're sharing their insights. But I really value people who are still boots on ground in the thick of it. You're in this life every day. I really want to hear from all those practitioners. So I really try to elevate people who have been doing this work for years, whether they're at a workplace or they work with a variety of workplaces as a consultant. And I want to elevate them and put them on stage and hear their stories, kind of how you're doing with your podcast, bringing on, a variety of people that maybe don't typically get a spotlight, but we all have stories to share. We all have great lessons that we can learn from each other. So I think the way we're approaching things with Wellbeing Think Tank, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So that's different than member-based organizations. So we're not asking people to pay us to be a member to have access to this content and resources. We're really trying to just push out resources. And we're kind of an aggregator of evidence-based information. So we're getting information from lots of other organizations and educational and research institutions. We're not really doing that work. We're just aggregating it all and trying trying to make it really accessible. We do it virtually. It's free. Learning and development is one of the first things to go when budgets get tightened in workplaces. And so if you don't have access to that, you can still come here and learn. And we're also talking about it from all sides. We're talking about the individual component and the organizational component, where I see the industry being very divided right now of like, all you need to do is this and all you need to do is this. And again, our philosophy is all you need to do is everything. So we're going to talk about everything. And hopefully that helps people, figure out where they can go with well-being for themselves and at their own workplace.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, launching a nonprofit really comes with its own set of challenges, right? So, what have been some of the most significant obstacles you faced in growing Wellbeing Think Tank, and how have you overcome them?
Our most significant obstacle we're still working on, which is appropriate funding. We really want to have corporate partners who believe in the work we're doing, and maybe they also work in this vertical. They work in workplace well-being, but we don't operate the way other organizations do. So they are used to paying for thought leadership, or like, oh, if we give you money, you're going to let us speak. And they might get to speak, but they go through the same vetting process as all of our presenters do. So we have a non-commercialization policy, and we absolutely want to elevate the great work being done by workplaces out there that might be commercialized. But the way we approach our partnerships is very different. And so it's a challenge, because if we just said, hey, we'll promote anything, we'll let anyone speak if you give us money, then we're not really doing the quality control that we believe in. And we believe no matter who's presenting, whether you are a supporting partner or not, you go through the same vetting process. So we do have corporate partners who help fund our operations, and they have spoken at events, but they go through the same process. And I'm really proud of that. I think we really model our core values. So even things like accessibility, I've been advised to charge more for things or to put more barriers in place, in my opinion, which would be making people pay money. And the reason why I made it a nonprofit is because I think education should be accessible for everyone. And if it's behind a paywall, it's not accessible. Even with our summit, which is next week, we offer complimentary tickets for people and students or anyone who needs financial assistance. We have a pay what you can ticket, which allows people to pay as little as $1. And then if someone reaches out though and says that they have a financial need, then we just give them a complimentary code. So I think we're really living our core values, but it definitely makes things harder when you want it to be done a certain way. Impact over profit, because nonprofits still need to bring in money to operate. So
Right.
yeah, I think prioritizing the impact is a challenge for sure.
No, that makes sense. And part of the show that really gets a lot of traction is really about advice, right? A lot of people listen for a variety of reasons, right? And I appreciate them for that, right? But for listeners who are considering making a major career shift, particularly in a purpose-driven field, right? Like you got attached to well-being and you're really going through with that. What advice would you give on finding clarity and navigating uncertainty as they enter into these type of waters?
Absolutely. I'm so honored. Actually, just this weekend, one of my mentees called me, and I don't really mentor him all the time anymore, but that's how we first met. He was my mentee, and he called me this weekend for advice on his career path. And not only did he call me, he brought his coworker because they had both been given an opportunity. And he said, oh, you gotta, let me call Chase. And I was really honored that they called me. And some of the things we just talked about this weekend was, one, how does this feel in your gut? I think our intuitions are strong. And I think if we listen to our bodies and our intuition and what our bodies are telling us, does this feel like a good opportunity, or does something feel icky about it and it's not something we want to pursue? I think also with values and purpose in our passions, we really do need to explore, do we want to focus on our passion through our work, or do we want to work somewhere else and that gives us opportunity to focus on our passions? So I happen to go to one of our local universities and I speak to freshmen every year. and we talk about opportunities in the career path field. And I say, I wish someone would have told me how much this industry paid. So maybe you're really
Mm.
passionate about health and well-being. And then sometimes when I share salary information, people are like, oh, that's the norm for that. And I was like, yes, very different than financial services or other white
Right.
collar. So I personally think it's okay if the work you do day in and day out isn't your ultimate passion, but maybe it provides you with financial stability that you can go volunteer somewhere, or you can be on a board of a nonprofit, or maybe you have a little side gig that you can work on. So I think there's ways we can massage the work we do to really align with our passions and our purpose so that way we feel fulfilled. And it's a little mindset tweak. I think it's great if you can work and work with your passion, but a lot of us can't do that. And I think it's irresponsible to be like, just go do this, because you can't just up and quit your job. You can't just go and take a job that pays you a third less than maybe what you're making. There's a lot of trade offs to consider. So I think spending time exploring too. I have people reach out to me all the time. I'm sure people reach out to you as well, Brian, of, hey, I see what you do and I'm really interested in that. Would you be willing to have an informational, a 20-minute
Yeah.
meet and greet with me? A lot of professionals out there will connect with you. And then that might be a nice mentorship or an introduction to a different opportunity. So really explore that career you think you want to go into as well, and learn, what is that career path like? What does their day-to-day look like? Would I actually enjoy doing that work? Or is it just kind of a hobby passion of mine? And maybe I'd be better suited to serve on a board or to volunteer somewhere. So
No, that makes a lot of sense. And, now taking that and talking about a little bit of well-being, what actionable steps can now individuals and organizations take today to really prioritize well-being in their careers and workplaces, especially, and I can imagine you've been a part of this, in environments that are resistant to change?
absolutely. So, as individuals, I think there's a few things you can do. So, when we talk about career well being, what does fulfill you? What are the tasks? We call this kind of job crafting, of really identifying what are the tasks you do day in and day out that really fill you up? And then, is there an opportunity to talk to your supervisor or manager and say, hey, Brian, here's what my day to day looks like. I really love doing this work. I really love it when I get to lead these customer success meetings. It really fills my cup. I feel so energized. I really don't like working on this one project. Are there any opportunities where maybe I could take on more responsibility doing this, and someone else who really enjoys this work can do this? We can't completely usually carve out our jobs that we love every single thing we do. I hate doing the books. I hate doing the bookkeeping, but you know what? It's just a part. But I just schedule it in, I get it done, and I focus on the things that fill my cup. But I think as an individual, there are some things we can do for our career well-being. One is I recommend people find a mentor, and mentorship goes both ways. Every mentor I've had, we're learning from each other. So reaching out to people, even just Googling and cold outreaching on LinkedIn, that is how I've met some of people I've been mentored by and that I'm a mentor to. Maybe going to something like a conference, or getting involved in a work group outside of your work with the thing you're passionate about, that can reignite your passion. And I always recommend things actually like listening to podcasts, like listen to a podcast, about something you're interested in. And that can help you kind of re-energize yourself, and then focus on what's within your control. So if you're in a workplace that's not very supportive, a lot of times you can't just up and quit your job. But if you do decide that leaving is going to be the best avenue for you, now you have time to figure out your strategy. How are you going to look for jobs? How are you going to do everything? When I've left jobs, a lot of times I give myself a year-long runway. I'll make the decision to leave, but then I start my planning. Then I'm like, what do I need to do so I can actually quit? Because I need a safety net. I don't have a safety net, so I can't go without income. And then again, prioritizing your own well-being. So carving out those times, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's listening to music, finding a friend at work. Research shows if we have a friend, that really helps boost our well-being. And your work bestie, it doesn't need to be you hang out with them outside of work. So your work bestie can just be that person, you connect with in the workplace, and you kibitz at the water cooler together, you're on Teams chatting with each other. But that can really be a protective factor for our health and well-being. And for organizations, organizations, the first thing to do is one, listen to your people, ask your people what they want and need. There's no such thing as survey fatigue, but there is such a thing as inaction fatigue. So people don't get tired. They love to give their opinion on what they would like to see you do. But if you're constantly sending out surveys and never doing anything, that's when people don't want to fill those out. So center employee listening through your employee resource groups, through your leaders, through teams, through surveys. Listen to what your people are saying on what they want and need and try to find a way to yes. And if there's anywhere you start investing, invest in learning and development for your people leaders so they can understand how can they be more inclusive leaders? How can they do things like identify their own biases? How can they become psychologically safe for their teams? How can they foster team building and team bonding and camaraderie? Your frontline people managers is the best place to start, I think, with fostering a culture of well-being in an organization because they're the ones directly interacting with people every day.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And as you think about future for Chase and Wellbeing Think Tank and all the things you're doing, what type of impact are you personally hoping to have as we look forward?
I mean, my goal is to really help organizations change how they view well-being. And I use the word well-being intentionally. Wellness is in the Affordable Care Act. There are wellness programs, which are really rooted in population health management, which is a great piece of the puzzle. But I want workplaces to go from more than just a program or a perk to this is a core part of your business strategy. And research shows that organizations that prioritize well-being, that prioritize inclusivity, they perform better financially. So if you want to have a really thriving organization, this needs to just become a part of the fabric. This is just how you do business. This is how we do business at this organization. So really helping create systemic change is my passion. And I'm really proud. I said just to someone yesterday in a phone call, I was like, I'm so proud of the nonprofit of Wellbeing Think Tank. I feel like that's my legacy for the industry and for the world of providing, elevating other people, which really fills my cup. I love giving other people a platform, helping people learn. I'm very passionate about equitable access to education. And I feel very fulfilled every day that I'm able, to do that work. So I feel really lucky.
I love that. And I wish you all the success as you do that going forward. And so now I'd love to flip the mic, right? And ask you, what's one question that you have for me that I can hopefully answer?
Absolutely. So I sort of have a two-part question for you. So I was digging into your background, looking at everything you've done. And I was really fascinated first with the fact that, you were a practicing attorney. You have your JD, that's really where your career started. And then I noticed you did some like workplace law, very important, you're helping organizations in that way, kind of working with HR, but you're in a very different day-to-day role right now.
Right.
And so I was really curious what led you to kind of pivot from being a practicing attorney to the role you're in now. I'd love to know that.
Oh, that's a great question. Oh man, we don't have that much time, but let me share with you. So, I started out as an employment attorney and was really, I was in private practice for a little bit and then pivoted into city government work just because, I was really kind of flowing with what the market was saying where my skills can go, right? I was struggling for a little bit when I first got to New York to actually find a legal job. But when I found something, at first I was volunteering, I was doing all types of random stuff. But when I found my footing, not only in private practice, but then in like internal investigations for city agencies, it was like at some point I got to a stage where the development that I was looking for wasn't coming. And I was constantly trying to still find a way to get back into private practice because I felt like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And to be honest, 2015 was my kind of epiphany year where I was like, you know what? I'm really trying to do this. I'm not getting many hits. What can I do that is related to this where my skills could still be applied in a way that was beneficial? And I went through coaching, I went through a 6-month engagement and really found that bridge for me was like employee relations, which was like a subset of human resources. And so I really started to look for jobs in that space. And I'll be honest with you, Chase, it was tough for me. I felt like a failure. I felt like I was giving up on what I had strived so hard for, because I was so dead set on like, I need to do this thing. Because at that time had aspirations of becoming somebody's general counsel somewhere or whatever, right? And so it was a tough year, but I eventually made the pivot into HR, and it was great. It was a strategic move in that I could still do some of the work I was doing in the employee relations space, but now I got a chance to support clients and really get closer to the business. And that's where like healthcare and HR came in. And so as I was doing that, I'll be honest, when I first got in, it was, all right, now the trajectory was always, I was striving high. All right, cool. I could see myself doing the CHRO route, chief people officer route. And I kept kind of pushing and gunning for that, right? Just putting myself in the right positions to eventually land in that space. And then things really changed. I started to have a better appreciation for like, why am I really striving for this? To be honest, it was probably for the money and prestige, right? For some external validation that I may have been seeking, right? And, the show is born out of the pandemic. And obviously, I didn't leave my role during that time, but I did pick up a lot of lessons during the pandemic in that I worked on something that ended up saving lives, right? A part of the redeployment center that we were a part of, a labor redeployment center at a hospital I was a part of. We worked on something that saved lives during that initial really surge of COVID. And that was like a light bulb. It was like, oh, wow, what you're doing right now is like, that's really cool. Like I've really felt like I was in healthcare. Like I'll never be patient bedside or anything like that. But it was like, oh, this is something. I started chasing a feeling. I started chasing, how can I now have an impact in this way? It's not going to be saving lives. That's a little dramatic, Brian, but that you can impact lives positively. Then had a fork in the road moment where I could continue going down the HR route or go this chief of staff route, supporting our CEO, and decided to do that. And it was in that position that the education work really, the light bulbs really started to go off. Because now it was, you can work on something, you could potentially lead an initiative that has this impact of changing the trajectory of young people's lives. And I was like, well, there you go. Why wouldn't I want to do that? And every year there's like a new crop that you get to really expose to what's happening and the opportunities that exist within healthcare. And so I'm very excited to be a part of, leading a lot of initiatives that touch on these similar themes, because I really figured that out 4 or 5 years ago, that this is what you need to be chasing, Brian. The titles, who cares about that? The money, to your point, it'll come, right? Like I'm able to, support myself and all those types of things. But what am I really contributing to society? And once I started figuring that out, everything that I do now, it's like everything is so crystal clear. I talk about positively impacting the human experience, and I'm not just BSing people. It's what I do day to day, and it's what I do with this show. And so everything I'm doing now is under that umbrella. And I got to tell you, it is a freeing feeling to be a part of.
Oh, I love everything you said. I feel like I'm in that same place in my journey right now with the work I'm doing now. I did want to ask you a part 2 to the question, because I was curious about that transition. And why I was so curious was, I know from my work that the legal profession is one of the most high stress professions that exist. And attorneys, people who work in the legal profession, I have friends who came from e-discovery, and they really talk about how they have a whole podcast about surviving e-discovery, which
I bet they do.
I know nothing about. I know nothing about
Okay.
legal anything, but I have worked with a law firm before. And, attorneys can sometimes really struggle with things like substance use, with suicidal ideation. Attorneys actually have a higher rate of attempted and completed suicide. And I would assume that with your background, you probably have a lot of attorneys who maybe listen to this podcast. So I was wondering if, from your perspective, if you had to give advice to maybe someone who's in that legal profession and is really struggling with their own health and well-being right now, but man, it's probably really hard to pivot out, or they want to stay in, what advice would you give to them on protecting their own health and well-being while working in an environment that could be really challenging, very high pressure?
Yeah, that's a great point. What I would say is that, oftentimes we in the profession get very laser focused on whatever our specialty is. I was an employment attorney. You have workers' comp attorneys. You have, M&A attorneys, all these things, criminal folks. And we get so dead set on what we're doing that we at times don't take a step back to be like, is this really the right thing for me? And so you mentioned something earlier too about, I mean, unfortunately, you had some health things that caused you to take a pause. But I would say before folks kind of get there, really take a step back from all the madness and be like, you know what? Is this really serving me long term? Do I really enjoy what I do? And it's no knock either way. You can or you can't. And look, sometimes, like I'll be honest, in the employment space, when I was doing investigations, it was a thrill. Like I loved getting some facts, getting this set of issues that are happening. And I know what this person said. I got text messages, all these things, calling them in and have them lie to my face, knowing that I got them. And I just keep throwing the rope out there. I keep it going. And the next, hit him with a question, boom, gotcha. Tears falling, all that. I'm not saying I'm happy about it, but I'm just saying it was a thrill. It was like, thrill of the chase. But is that something you want to do long term? For me, it worked out for a little bit, but at some point, it does become daunting to walk in spaces and nobody's happy to see you. Right? Like, I'm not saying people need to be happy to see me now, but at least there's not a disdain factor that comes with me entering a room now. And so I think that it's important for attorneys, and you can apply this to anywhere else too, but especially attorneys, to get out of that initial mindset of I have to do this thing or I am this thing. I am an employment attorney. I am an M&A attorney. No, you're a person who happens to do this thing. But is this what you want to do long term? And you really got to think about it. And I think you mentioned something earlier that was great about really focusing on is this for me? Is this something that I really value doing? So that's the initial piece of advice that I would give folks. And those are hard questions to answer because they open up doors that truthfully you may not be comfortable walking through.
Everything you said, what comes to mind is, the sunk cost fallacy when we've invested so much into our education or spending time somewhere. And it ties into why I left of when you get to this point in your career and in your gut, something needs to change. Something has to happen and it might be time to leave something. That is what we have to overcome is that, well, I am this, or I've already done this, or I've spent so much time here. I've climbed the ladder up here. Am I really going to walk away from that? Am I really going to leave? But sitting with it and, I could just really resonate with everything you're saying. Those are hard conversations we have to have with ourselves and how to move forward. But I think when you get to that other side, it's a lot of hard work why you left, when you leave and then you find the thing, then you get to feel fulfilled every day. And it just feels so good. And so I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the origins of the show come from the Great Resignation. I know what the pandemic did was forced people to have that conversation with themselves. They were either furloughed or, put on pause for whatever reason, and they didn't have a choice. They weren't going to the office or anything like that. They started asking those questions, really started swirling, and people really sat down and was like, you know what? Yeah, this isn't it. And I was fearful for whatever reason. And then they decided to make these leaps, right? They either right then and there, or to your point, they were planful about it. They took 6 months, 12 months and did it. But yeah, I hope that it doesn't take, one of the goals of the show is that I hope it doesn't take people a global pandemic or something of that nature to really start being a bit more intentional about where they want to go in their careers. So those are two great questions. So thank you. Thank you for that.
I love that. I say every day you wake up, it's a chance to start over again. So,
Absolutely.
If we wake up, we can choose where we want that path to go.
Absolutely. Well, Chase, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate Sandra for connecting us. She got 3 people who are on this season come directly from Sandra. I know, right? It's the power of LinkedIn, the power of social media, all those things. And so learning about your story, connecting with you, I'm just glad that you're able to share that with my audience, and would love for you to give a shout where our listeners can find and support you.
Absolutely. I definitely invite people to come and learn about our nonprofit Wellbeing Think Tank. It's wellbeingthinktank.org, and to come and participate in our free events and our community of practice. And then my work is at hhpcultures.com. So really talking about happy, healthy, productive cultures of well-being. That's the work I do every day. And then, yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to connect with me. And I even host open office hours. Every Wednesday afternoon, I host open office hours through the nonprofit and meet with people and connect with people who just want to chat about well-being at work.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you for all that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. I want to thank Chase Sterling for joining me today. I'll be sure to put all of her information in our show notes. And I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Chase, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Alive Podcast Network. See you soon.